Hi and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to go through how I made the banner for my YouTube channel. This is something that is more simple than other speed paints that I've done on this channel recently. To start off, I wanted to make a tiling pattern for the background. This is something that I wanted to be simple enough that it doesn't distract from the main foreground, and yet it occupies the background space, so it's not just a blank sheet of color back there or gradient or whatever else I decided to put back there. But I decided to go with cherries. My username on most platforms is cherry or cherica or some version play off cherry, so it seemed fitting to me. And plus I really enjoy working with reds and pinks anyway, especially when I do something simple like just a character portrait or a self-portrait. My favorite color to shade with is a pink, so I kind of had a color palette in mind going into this. So the cherry pattern, I wanted just even space between each cherry, both vertically and horizontally. It was actually really simple to do. I put everything together on a grid, and I have 6 cherries on the image here, but I only needed 2 to give me enough information for Clip Studio to actually create that tiling pattern. And it seems really vibrant now, but when I place it in the background, I actually just turn the opacity down a little bit for that layer, and it just lays very nicely. Going into the foreground image, I had several different ideas for this, but what I landed on was me basically surfing on a giant version of my Wacom tablet with my pen in hand and pretending that I'm confident. But this was fun to do. I usually try to do at least one self-portrait a year. I don't draw myself all that often, so that's always kind of a fun exercise, I think, to try to interpret the way you think you look. You live in your own skin. You don't look at your own face as often as you would look at someone else's face, at least I hope. But it's fun, just kind of trying to analyze what features I would include to represent myself and so on. And then coming out from the Wacom tablet, I actually used the cord to write out Cherica to represent the channel name. So that was kind of a fun idea that I had. And at the end of Cherica, there's actually the little USB port. It was a fun idea. I had fun with it. I even decided to go ahead and ink the line art for Cherica in red, this maroon color, because it was something that I wanted to incorporate into the color palette later. And my cursive is not the best, but I kind of wanted to give it like a messy cord look, and it's that, possibly. So once I get my line art done, I always start everything off by putting in just flat line art colors. And this black is very desaturated, and I've learned the hard way that you can't go into putting colors as dark as black into a canvas as very dark, because when you start trying to add shadows onto it, they don't read. So if you desaturate it even a little bit, when you actually go in to add a darker color on top of that, it reads much better. And I've also learned the hard way to start with desaturated base colors and add in the shading color, and that sort of brings the colors to life a little bit more, the base colors to life a little bit more. That's my personal preference anyway. This came out a little bit more, well, I guess not. It's all right. So what I did was I locked the transparency on the Cherica layer, and I was trying to go ahead and get a gradient started on it, but I kind of fought with what I wanted to do with it for a while. So instead I decided to go in and start adding details. I added in the little blue dots on my Wacom tablet, and the jacket I'm wearing is plaid. So I went in and added the plaid pattern onto my jacket. Plaid is something that I have a love-hate relationship with drawing. Usually I think it looks messy and I don't like how it looks. But this was just small enough that I think it turned out pretty good. Mostly it's just a matter of how the lines line up and how, but you can do plaid several different ways. I've seen there's so many different variations of plaid, but it is one of my favorite things to wear, so I figure I might as well draw it. So once I get all these other like overpainted details in, the next thing I like to do is I'll go ahead and adding in the shadows, and you can see how already when I start adding in shadows that darkens in that a bit better. If I had used a darker gray, that would not have shown through, or a darker gray to almost a light black even, it wouldn't have shown through as well. And one thing that I tried with this that I've not ever really tried before was to lock the transparency on the shading layer and add a gradient into the shadows. And I do it very subtly, but I wanted to give it a little bit more contrast so that the image wasn't so heavy on the pinks. I do have some blues introduced where in my jeans and also in the Wacom tablet. So I thought maybe adding in a little bit of blue in the darker areas of the shadow would help balance the image out a little bit more and not give it such a pink heavy color palette. Another thing that I tend to do when I do shading is I don't just leave the lines blunt at the ends. I like to take a watercolor brush and sort of blend them out a little bit more, and I like the watercolor brush because I was a very big fan of the blur tool, and honestly I overused it and it was just killing the quality of my art. But I like the watercolor brush a lot better, just a transparent watercolor brush with the color that I already have down for the shading, and I just sort of stroke it outward to soften the line that I'm using to shade with. And I think it gives it not necessarily a watercolor look, but it gives it a different kind of look, and I'm kind of partial to it. So it's something that I incorporate into almost everything that I do. I will also say that most of the time that I do my shading, I will do it on a multiply layer. Every now and then I will change it and do it on a hard light layer, both with lowered opacity. And I like the hard light layer because it, depending on the circumstance, it can bring out more of the hue that you're trying to pull from. Just for an example, in the Detective Pikachu image that I did, when I shaded over the Charizard with the blue shadow I was using in multiply, it made it look muddy where blue and orange are opposite. But I switched it to hard light and more of that blue came forward and it gave it a lot more contrast. And that's something that I just kind of play with depending on what I'm doing and what color palette I'm using. And it's not always hard light, but hard light is one that I'm more familiar with that I actually like to use. So I like to play back and forth between multiply, hard light, and soft light. I use the glow sparingly, and I have gotten into where I like to do overlays over top of images, like certain layers or the entire image, just to sort of balance the total image towards the end. Here, instead of just having the chord be one plain color, I decided to lock the transparency and add a gradient over Cherica. And I tried to add a border with that maroon color that I blocked it in with in the beginning, but I don't want it to be too thick and blocky. I wanted it to be just enough to where it stands out from the background, but it's not going to be so bold that it's harsh almost. So I ended up going with more of a darker pink color. I went from using the maroon, I actually color selected the actual cherry in the background to border Cherica, and I think that balanced out a lot better. I think that the maroon, by the time I was done, just made these soft pinks it overpowered them. And the other thing I did was I took the same colors from the gradient in Cherica and I used it as an overlay over top of the actual figure drawing. And that just helped, I think, bring everything together as a more cohesive color palette. The reds were standing out a little too much in the blue as well, and the overlay just sort of helped tie it all together. And yeah, that's how I did it. And thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos every other Tuesday, and we'll see you next time.